ena waka, ena mana, tena koto. Ena waka, to the many canoes, ena mana, to the stewards of this region, tena koto, warm greetings. Thank you for being here. And I'd also like to thank the Professor Graham Nuttall's family and the foundation for making it possible for me to share my work and to learn here with you. And to Leticia and all the colleagues in the School of Education that have been so wonderful and welcoming. I'm really enjoying this visit and learning a lot. I also like to introduce to you my better half, Dr. Asha Sifchi, who is joining me over here, and I'm glad that she's here to try to make sure that I keep things on time. And thank you for being here, honey. So I thought it would be a good idea for us to take some time to essentially do a partial demonstration of what I mean by socio-transformative constructivism. Because I know that we've got a lot of teachers in the audience, and again, thank you for being here. But just to give you a sense of what some of these ideas mean, and then have an opportunity to explain why I'm using socio-transformative constructivism, why this particular theoretical framework is informing my work. And then maybe highlight some findings from a research project that we conducted in a high school. But I also work with elementary school teachers, so elementary school teachers don't leave yet. So because some of the work that I do is really cuts across grade levels, and so I essentially work with K to 16 students. So it will be a good idea then to highlight some of those findings from research, maybe share some recommendations, and make sure that I leave some time for questions and answers. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. All right? So we're ready? If I'm really passionate about this work, I'm a Latino, I tend to talk with my hands, and sometimes I may start talking really fast. If I start talking too fast, make sure you can go like this, and I try to slow down. If you are finding that what you're hearing, you're liking, give me a thumbs up. That would be great. If you don't like what you're hearing, give me a thumbs up anyways. It'll be a little secret, I can handle that, that's fine. So I wanted to do here essentially a partial demonstration using a POE, predict, observe, and explain. So I have here a magnet. And sometimes, magnets is a really wonderful thing to introduce at any grade level, when we're talking about this particular concept. But even a POE is a really powerful pedagogical strategy to get into the students' prior knowledge before you teach anything, and allow the opportunities for the students, funds of knowledge and cultural background and experiences to come into play before we actually teach the science. So if you think for a moment about, I will ask you, to predict what will happen if I put this magnet closest to this one, and you will work in groups of 3, mixability, experiences, and then write your predictions. And then I have an opportunity to show you what will happen, and then you're supposed to compare your predictions with your observations. So we won't have time to do the full demonstration, but just in your own head, just think about what you will write that will happen when I put a magnet close to the other. I'm going to put it a little bit closer to the end and see what happens here. I put a little bit to this end, and it's really strong. And if I put it in the middle, something weird happens, right? So this is a little bit of a discrepant event because students tend to think, well, the magnet will attract just like I did there, and then that's the end of the story, and it's fun. And if you're talking with elementary school children, they may just think it's magical because they cannot see what's going on. So another thing that is more fun to do instead of getting into discussing what may be going on there is providing a student with another demonstration for them to have an opportunity to revise and think about the model that they may be constructing there. Because the idea is you're asking them, well, can you draw arrows to show what's going on? Will you be drawing arrows that may be showing that the magnet is being pushed or is being attracted? And give them an opportunity for them to try it out with their own magnets and so on. But again, before teaching and covering content, we are constantly pushed to do. And one of the things that we're asking with STC is just to take a moment and then provide the students with another opportunity to think about what may be going on there. And then you may ask them, well, what if you put a magnet use a magnet like this, and if you put it underneath this paper, and I have a bunch of iron filings here, what will happen if I spread some of this on top of the magnet? Again, getting students to make a prediction and trying to explain what may be happening. So in your own head, what will you see? Some of you, we got a lot of science teachers here, you may have done this before, and you can see something happening. So we actually then make the invisible visible. So instead of starting talking about a magnetic field, for example, having the students experience what a magnetic field may look like, they cannot see things. And especially if you're working with elementary school children, it can create a lot of confusion. And I believe that the students will stop listening as soon as you start talking about magnetism and start making a definition, because they're still trying to figure out what makes a magnet work. So I think we spend a lot of time in a more teacher-centered approach, and we start defining magnetism first. I know as a teacher, as a beginning teacher, I was extremely boring because I didn't know any better. I will just teach the way that I was taught, so I will immediately, well, we're going to learn about magnets today, and magnetism is blah, 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 and I can see the children's eyes going like this. And then I show them pictures, different poles will repel, and different poles attract, and it would show you pictures like this, which are totally outside children's experience because they don't see a lot of magnets like this in everyday life. So it's totally decontextualized to how people learn and make connections. And then it will show you this crazy picture, especially working with elementary school children, and say, the Earth is like a big magnet, and it looks like that. Right? And then you can repeat the same thing on a test and so on. But if you do this, we're arguing that the students end up making an association to something that they can actually see. You make something invisible, visible, and then they can revise their models, use more of the engineering design process, and start figuring out, well, my arrows were in the wrong direction. What's going on here? What is making this go like that? And if you're working with older kids, the way that the magnet was shaking and moving, there's a great deal of energy going on there. How can that be used for to benefit society? So asking questions like that, you start then making school science more relevant to everyday life. So with this approach, you are essentially creating a need to know. And we're finding that once you create a need to know, that you essentially activate that curiosity in children. You got them hooked and interested because now they want to know why that's working, why is this working, and what will happen if I put a magnet next to this one. So when you show them a picture of the Aurora Australis, and you tell them, well, that happens because the Earth is a big magnet, they will not just roll their eyes at you. They probably will believe you because they've seen that, and they can see that dust particles from space get caught in those magnetic field that is represented here. So you make something so complicated and abstract and something a little bit much more relevant, and give them opportunity for students to research and essentially apply STEM ideas to understanding concepts like this. So we're arguing, that helps with making students make more relevant, long-lasting connections. All right, so let me just move a little bit, and if we have more time, we'll show you what other steps will happen here. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why I'm using STC instead of something else. And when we look at social-cultural context of the individual, the family, schools, and then we look at ideological orientation, which is essentially a system of beliefs and values that each one of us have. So if you're concerned about issues of racism, gender discrimination, equity issues, you're talking about ideological orientation, your system of beliefs. Whether you're for or against some of these concepts, that has to do with your ideological beliefs. And then when you're talking about how this connect with, in the school context, you are talking about social hegemony or the status quo. You're trying to preserve the status quo, or you're trying to open up opportunities for everybody to learn, and so on. When you look at then the epistemological orientation, which is essentially how people learn, or if you're concerned about bringing indigenous knowledge into the science classroom, and you're interested in integrating it with Western science knowledge, then you're talking about epistemology, and you're talking about making some of those connections. So you're talking here about addressing educational hegemony, which is essentially the status quo. Now, one of the things that I've discovered, working with teachers, is that you get a lot of questions about, well, how do I make a connection between these two? Because there seems to be a disconnect between the ideological orientations and the epistemological orientation. Even though we have learned a great deal in the last 40 so years about what are some of the institutional and sociocultural factors that prevent people from participating fully in schools. Thanks to advances in research in social justice or theories of social justice like feminism, critical theory, multicultural education, it's a great deal that we know already. Similarly, when it comes to theories of learning, we have learned a great deal in the last 50 years. With the work of Piaget for individual constructivism, the work of Vygotsky in social constructivism, situated cognition, it's a great deal that we learn about how people learn and how knowledge may be socially constructed if you're using a Vygotskian approach. But still, there's this disconnect with these two camps of research, a lot of times not talking to one another. So one of the things that STC provides for me anyways that helps me make sense of this is trying to make a connection between those theoretical frameworks. So when we look at the connection between the sociocultural context and ideological orientation, that I use cross-cultural education as a theory of social justice to guide my work there, then I'm more interested in looking at social justice as an equal opportunities to learn and equal opportunities to succeed. So instead of social hegemony here, I'm more interested in empowerment. And empowerment is paying attention to issues of representation and equity. And when we look at this other connection over here, the epistemological orientation, I use social constructivism as a theory of learning to help me make sense about how people learn. So STC helps me make a connection between these two circles. And then here, instead of educational hegemony, I'm interested in enlightenment and acknowledging and appreciating that knowledge is mediated and partial. So I'm not too concerned about the students just memorizing what magnetism is and all of the principles behind it, because a lot of that information that they're learning right there, it may most likely change. There may be new advances and new ideas that they will have to learn. So I'm more interested in helping them how to learn than just learning a stream of disconnected information. So the good thing here then with making this connection between these two orientations is that I'm more interested in the critical thinker, in producing a critical consumer and producer of knowledge, not somebody who's just replicating information. So social constructivism was socio-transformative constructivism, and it's an orientation that takes into account historical and institutional and social codes, and then power is a central construct in socio-transformative constructivism, because power mediates access to knowledge. And I won't discuss this in detail right now. I'll be glad to share some of these papers with you, but STC is informed by 4 interconnected components. And the dialogic conversation, that pays attention to trust and developing a meaningful relationship with the students so they feel free and comfortable to participate and truly share their ideas in the classroom. Metacognition, knowing how we learn and why we learn. So not necessarily just knowing how you learn, but actually being able to ask the question, why are we learning this? Why is this important, right? And then authentic activity, like I mentioned with this demonstration, is contextualizing the activity in a way that is culturally and socially relevant for students. And reflexivity perhaps is a more challenging one, because you need to be paying attention to your own academic, social, and ideological locations and how they may influence your relationship in the classroom. So in other words, you may be the best prepared teacher in the world. You probably love teaching incredibly. But if you're working into a classroom as an Anglo female and you got a very culturally diverse classroom, you're going to need a little bit more than contact knowledge and feeling really secure with your subject. There's going to be you need to be more aware about how your gender location, your life experiences may contrast with the students that you're working with, and in what ways that facilitates your connection with them and in what ways, it may create some obstacles you may need to work with. Because the important thing to remember that I think STC tries to make make us more aware, is that we don't teach science. We teach children about science, and that's a big deal. It's a big difference. So when it comes to connecting STC with Kaupapa Maori philosophy of teaching, I see a lot of connections, especially with the Tino Ranatiratana. That's right? Right. I'm practicing that one. That was a lot of syllables. So this whole notion of self-determination is very congruent with the notion of STC. The idea of collectivism, and especially as a Latino and as a scholar of color, member of underrepresented groups in STEM, the whole notion of collectivism is really important in terms of having participants feel that they have ownership of the research enterprise, and it's meaningful for them too. So the idea of collaboratively defining and prioritizing Maori goals or the research agenda with the participants in a meaningful way, that's also very congruent with STC. So essentially, STC is very much interested in decolonizing collaboration. And like I work with a lot of people that come with different theoretical frameworks that may be different from STC, and that's perfectly fine, because it's not that STC is the theory of everything, or everybody that I work with has to follow that framework. That's not the purpose of it. It informs my work, and if it informs other people's work, that's great. But it is more interested and open to the idea of decolonizing the collaboration, so it's much more equal, and it goes in both directions instead of just somebody benefiting from the research enterprise. The idea then is just to address the common good. So this also seems to be very congruent with Professor Nuttall's philosophy, because he and I seem to be very concerned about this issue that, we know so much already about what we need to do, but we keep on studying more about what we need to do without knowing whether what we already learned is really having an impact. And he said that in, I believe it was the inaugural address for this lecture series, that he said something very powerful that resonated with me, that he says, meanwhile, of course, fashions in teaching methods came and went, without much evidence that they were more or less effective than the older methods. All we learned was that the teachers inevitably reverted back to the methods that seemed to them to be tried and true. And then Ken Seidner from the US in 1981 said something really powerful that stuck with me when I was a graduate student, because it happened to me. He said that whatever you learn in a teacher education program gets washed out by the school experience. And that's been a great source of frustration for me when I have students that I've finally managed to get them really interested in doing social transformative work, addressing issues of gender in the classroom, making the content more culturally and socially relevant. And they're so excited and eager to go in there in the school and try those things, and they go, no, even think about doing any of that here. And they are very frustrated, and they come back and say, well, maybe I get to do it when I become a real teacher. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what happens to some of those students when they become a real teacher and the struggles that they face. And I think that's one of the reasons that we continue to have this issue, that we're just generating a lot of good ideas in research, but not actually being able to measure what really long-lasting impact that is having by creating a system that allows the students to try some of these ideas. So I'm very much in agreement there with Professor Nuttall. So the research questions in my work usually follow the three questions. What happens when you implement a research project that enacts research-based recommendations and that directly involves teaching for diversity and for understanding? So I'm really interested in finding out, well, what happens when you do what everybody's saying that should work? Is it going to work? And a lot of that work is being done in a way that is not culturally and socially relevant, so we add a component of cultural and social relevance to it. So what are the challenges that you encounter if you do something like that? So what are the challenges to innovation? And in what ways does social transformative constructivism framework can impact teachers' professional development and students' learning? All right, so in this particular study, I work with 10 preservist teachers that took my science methods classes. These are secondary preservist teachers. And my secondary science methods class had an emphasis, just like my elementary methods class, on STC, where I'm constantly modeling what STC may look like. And students get an opportunity to deconstruct those activities, and they can tell me and challenge me, well, I don't see how this is culturally relevant or how this is gender inclusive and so on. So we can get an opportunity to engage in those discussions. So the neat thing about this is that I follow a group of the students after they graduated from the teacher education program for 2 years after they got a job. And in order to follow what the literature is recommending to provide a space for students to practice and try those new ideas, these students were placed in schools with teachers who have participated in a 2-week professional development workshops where, again, I demonstrated a lot of the things that I was doing in my methods class. So when my students were to come and work with Letitia, for example, Letitia already had the same discourse. She already understood what some of these activities were like. So the students will be supported by the teacher in that placement. So eliminating data as an issue. So I followed them for 2 years after graduation. I ended up with 4 because some of my students moved out too far for me to follow them. And one of them decided, well, high school was not for him, decided to go into elementary. So I worked with these 4 in the surrounding area, and there were 2 Anglo males, 1 Anglo female, and 1 Latina. And the neat thing about this project, that being longitudinal, it provided opportunities for professional development every summer, so I could work and address specific issues that the students were encountering, which again is one of the suggestions for research, that instead of abandoning teachers out there and then saying, well, good luck and I hope things work for you, they are provided with ongoing professional development for at least a couple of years so they can really get better at what they do. And the neat thing about this project is that we also provided a great deal of learning technologies like Vernier Probe, which is a high-end learning technology to do a lot of hands-on kind of labs in the classroom. And so we were visiting them weekly, taking videotapes and field notes, and we interviewed them 2 to 3 times a year formally in an ethnographic interview. And we also, because I'm very much in agreement with Professor Nuttall, that it was important for us to get an understanding of what's happening between that interaction between teacher and the students. What are some of the things that create an environment to facilitate learning? So we definitely wanted to hear students' voices, so we interview a group of students several times a year. So there was the qualitative analysis of the ethnographic interviews, and we also conducted a quantitative analysis by using semi-structured concept maps. So we created these large concept maps that were semi-structured, that have several components with questions, and the students had an opportunity to answer, like do a pre-test, and then a post-test at the end of the unit. We were working in schools that had a large number of second language learners, and we found that the semi-structured concept maps helped the students kind of keep the big picture in mind and make more connections instead of discriminating against them with multiple choice questions, that essentially favored English speakers against the language learners. And then we did integrated reliability for the study. So just to give you some quick examples of what some of the activities that we carry out for STC, we have things like a scientist like me, the students created a digital quilt, which essentially they take a picture of themselves, they write a little bio about themselves, and they find a scientist that looks like them. And they get a picture and they write a bio about the scientist, and they put it side to side, and they put it on the wall in the classroom. So that's what we're calling a digital quilt. We do something similar with women in science. And we carry out a lot of the culturally relevant, socially relevant kind of problem-solving scenarios for the students to apply what they were learning. Like, for example, this particular rover here, this is one that we put together. The students had an opportunity to create their own. But you can see there are different kind of Vernier probes here. Like this is Vernier, and this is Pascal. We've got 2 probe things going on. This is a magnetometer over here. So it measures changes in the magnetic field. And then here we have a temperature probe, right? And then it's a robot arm. And this is a wireless video camera. So the professors in astronomy, or the teacher in astronomy, have a group of students create a scenario of a solar body, and another group of kids will create a rover like this one. And then they will put it in a scenario, and they're supposed to explore it, just seeing what the camera sees. They weren't allowed to see the scenario. This little video camera here, can you see it? In there? I don't know if we could light the show. There it is. Wirelessly sends an image to a TV in a different room. So you could see the kids really excited, thinking like they were going to crash somewhere, just seeing what was going on. And the idea is that if there were changes in temperature, we hit hot spots and magnets. And so they will be able to try to use some of the information from what they were seeing and readings that they were getting, being sent wirelessly to a computer, for them to try to identify what kind of solar body they crash landed. That was a lot more fun than when I first thought about the planets. I was really boring. I was really boring. I would just put a list of the planets, tell them about how far from the sun they were, and the students are bored, and I'm bored repeating that information. But doing something like this, I'm telling you, it's a lot more fun, and you learn a great deal. So the notion too of transdisciplinarity is really important to us because we see, since we're working with a lot of culturally diverse students and also students that are language learners, we find that integrating math, technology, engineering, social studies, language literacy, it just makes perfect sense for helping the students, not just learn science content, but learn how to interpret and analyze and make good sense of that content. All right, so I mentioned that we integrate a lot of learning technologies and so on. And so let me just give you an example here about what happened and what kind of impact the project had. So we have different levels of implementation. We have emergent, developing, and active. So by the third year of the project, or essentially after 2 years that they were teaching in the schools in their own jobs, we gave the pre and post concept map to the students. And we were hoping that the students, they started most of them started at the emergent level and moved to the active level or active implementation of STC. And we saw a strong correlation between the active level with the student performance. And we actually were impressed that the students did really well on the concept map test because when we interviewed them, they told us they found that really hard. And when we asked them, well, why are you finding the concept map so hard? And they said, well, because we cannot cheat. They have become so good that with the multiple choice, we may not know what's going on, and don't be able to really understand what the question is, but they knew they got 25% chance of getting it right. But with the structured concept map, there is no such a thing. You actually have to show what you know, and they actually were saying things like that. So we were impressed that, there was a large number of students that got a score of 70 and up. This is Gary in astronomy, and it was different units. This was the moon, this was learning about sexually transmitted diseases in grade 9, which is really awesome that this teacher actually decided to teach the concept, because this is one that a lot of our teachers are like, okay, well, let's just skip this or just kind of show you a few transparencies and move on. Oh, this is Laura from biology. So she was at the developing level. And we noticed that the students that were at the developing level, then the students' performance, her students' performance was not as high. So the more active the students were along the continuum of implementing STC, the higher the performance of the students in their units. So I think I have a little bit more time that I wanted to delve a little deeper into one of these case studies. This case study got published in the Journal of Research in Science Teaching if you want to read the whole article. But I think it gives us a little bit more insight about some of those challenges that I was talking about that pre-service teachers find even after they've been supported with these kinds of ideas and frameworks, then trying to get them to become the kind of teachers that they want to be and the kind of teachers that the research literature is saying that we need. So this is Gary, which is a really interesting example of a growing population of mature professionals that had staying in science for a while and then decided they want to come back and get a teaching degree and then go out there and teach in the schools, which is fantastic. And he was really frustrated with what's going on in the schools, so he wanted to contribute because he saw even his own children, not having as much fun in science as he did as a scientist, as a geologist. So he said, well, I'm going to become a teacher, I'm going to go there, I'm going to make a difference, and so on. And then he got his wish because he ended up getting a really good job. And of course, in physics, because we have a shortage of teachers wanted to pursue that particular field. So I ended up teaching physics and astronomy because I was the best qualified person for that job. And then he ended up teaching in a school that was 98% Latino and 65% in the free and reduced lunch, which is a determination that we use to show levels of socioeconomic status. I think you heard about that. And for this particular analysis, I used Giddens' structured agency construct because he gave me a really good language to explain how Gary was working against and within structures in the school and even outside to make some sense about what was going on in the schools. We got two sets of findings here that are explained in the paper. I tried to organize them in these two general categories, institutional and structural challenges, which are deeply entrenched policies, and sociocultural structural challenges, which are deeply entrenched racialized interactions. When it comes to teachers' low expectations, I want to make sure to make clear, there are no basting against teachers. I think teachers are overworked, underpaid, and they are wonderful people, committed to the profession. I haven't really met a teacher who doesn't want to do well by students. So, but these are words that Gary used as a novice teacher coming into the school. And I think it's important to use his words to explain, his experience. So when it comes to teacher low expectations, during the first year interview, he says, well, the teachers that struggle the most, even though they won't admit it, is probably due to their prejudices. There are a lot of people who have been here for a while that have a bad attitude. You could tell that they are prejudiced and they shouldn't be here. So again, he was working in a 98% Latino school, lower socioeconomic status, and the majority of the teachers were in the opposite ethnic group. And then being a high school and being in a similar distribution that you see pretty much around the world, you see more of the physics and chemistry more perhaps male-oriented than the biology classes. So when we interviewed the students, this is one of the things that one of them said. There are two kinds of teachers here, the ones that want to be here and the ones that shouldn't be here. So the culture has a really, the culture of the school was really thick with the notion of low expectations. So through STC and the dialogic conversation, reflexivity, working with Gary and doing our visits to the school, having informal conversation, even during the formal interview, we tried to help Gary reconnect with the kind of teacher that he wanted to be, not the kind of teacher that he was becoming at the school. And he started, because STC is not telling you what to do, but it's more like a provocateur, provokes thinking and reflection about, we will show him examples of what he said, the kind of teacher that he wanted to be. And this is what we hear you saying, what's going on. And have an opportunity for him to reflect about that, and he realized that he was kind of getting caught in the same cycle of low expectations. And he was also giving in to students because the students weren't doing assignments. There was a culture that there was no point in giving students homework because they weren't going to do it. So when teachers get hired or got hired at the school, they said, don't even bother about giving students assignments because they are not going to do it. So he did that too. So buying into the same culture of lower expectations. So he decided to do something different through this dialogic conversation. So in terms of an agentic response, which is something important for STC that it has a transformative component. He said, I think my main area of growth so far was reflecting on what I did my first year. And I think the biggest mistake I made was giving in to the students a little bit too much. I think I was influenced a lot by the existing teachers here. I gave them more and harder work, and I am glad that I did. The students definitely rose up to the higher expectation level, and I earned a lot of respect. Now, the interesting thing here that I really need to pay attention to this, because once you then step up to push the students to have the high expectation, then you have to be willing to provide the support that will allow the students to meet those high expectations. So some of the things that he did is like, well, he ended up providing like vocabulary bingo, because again, you got a lot of second language learners in the classroom, and he was teaching physics and astronomy with a great deal of difficult terminology. So he provided definition trouble slips, provided, guided reading for the English language learning students, note-taking and study strategies. The concept maps that we were using as a tool of assessment, it was really interesting. It turned out to be a tool for professional development for them because they really like seeing the whole big picture of the unit, the different concepts organized in a concept map. But then it turned out to be a really good tool for the students to practice and learn some of the concepts. So he ended up integrating it as part of his instruction. So, and then providing more bilingual resources through our grant, we will buy resources in English like BrainPop, which is a fantastic, I don't know if some of you use it here, but it's a fantastic web-based instructional software. It's been translated in several languages, and Spanish is one of them. It's now in French, and I think they're thinking about another language. But it's really neat because it's like animated videos that the students really like. It's only like 3 minutes, and it explains really difficult concepts, really clearly. And you can control it like a VCR. You can have a replay, and has a lot of games and tests that you can take. So the students really enjoy it. So these students, the bilingual learners, that were using that a lot. So he provided extra support when the students, when trying to provide that extra expectation. But as he provided this extra support, and this is something you need to catch here, is that the new challenges arose, right? It's not that everything now is cool, but now he got a new challenge. Now, the enrollment and attendance increased in his classroom. That was a school that a lot of kids in high school weren't coming to the school at all. But now they started to find that the classroom was finding interesting, that he was like a more caring teacher. So he had an astronomy class that was 35 plus students, really crowded in there. So he felt more pressed for time, and then he said, I am more efficient now and doing more and better activities. I am covering more content, but now I am struggling this semester because I've never been this far before. So he didn't worry too much about covering the whole curriculum because kids weren't there, the kids weren't doing homework, it was a slower pace. Now kids were coming in and doing their work and saying, well, give us more of this, and now he had to do more work. So he said, I'm struggling this semester because I've never been this far along in either physics or astronomy, so I have to prepare new lessons every night and covering new stuff. All right? So it gets better. So there's the whole other category of the students' low achievement and engagement in science. One of the things that he started doing is implementing more culturally and socially relevant, hands-on and minds-on, inquiry-based kind of STC activities to get the students to be more involved, like that planet exploration rover that I showed you a picture a little while ago. He would do like electricity audit, getting the students, to figure out how much money their families could save if they switch to fluorescent lights instead of regular lights. It was neat that the students said, well, but it costs too much money to buy fluorescent lights. And through the notion of STC about agency and being transformative, they brainstorm about what they could do to make sure that we're going to save that much money, but the fluorescent lights are really expensive. If you're going to change the whole house, it would require a lot of money. So what to do? So they decided to start a writing letter campaign to the electrical company saying, we really want to switch to fluorescent lights and save power, but we can afford it. Can you donate some fluorescent lights? And then they end up getting some fluorescent lights. So it was a way of not just learning about electricity, but then seeing how that knowledge can help them in their everyday life. So another thing that he did to address students' low achievement is that, interestingly, this is the only school that I've seen that actually had a school observatory, a small observatory in the backyard that was being broken for years. So he decided, well, that he was going to try to fix it, and he started doing a fundraising campaign and trying to make it work. And he got the little observatory working. So he decided to, because there was a lot of complaint that parents weren't participating in the school, they weren't coming to school. And who would like to go to a school where all you hear is complain about your children? I definitely don't want to. But this time, they have an opportunity to go there. They have a parents' night and look at the stars, and and get an opportunity to get the parents, do some fundraising. He got the kids involved with a science Olympiad. It was the first time that the school participated in a statewide competition in science. So he was trying to do something to bring the community and get the students to have a sense of community. But again, a new challenge then arose when you start doing all those wonderful things. So then he felt more pressed for time to do STC lessons. It takes a lot more time, he said, than just copying worksheets out of the workbook. There is no doubt about it, but it's very rewarding as a teacher to put the extra effort in because I definitely see the results every time that I do. Of course, he was not able to do STC lessons every single time as a novice teacher, but that's where he wanted to go. But it was difficult to find the time to be able to do some of this work. So in terms of the new challenges, when it comes to student low achievement and engagement, you have the high enrollment and attendance. He says it's much harder to do inquiry-based activities when you have 35 kids, actually all of them showing up to the classroom, right? Cramming to one class, is really, really tight. And then when they saw that the kids were coming to his class and kids were having fun and we were doing things, then colleagues started coming and asking him for advice. They said, hey, what are you doing in the classroom? The kids seem to be coming to yours, and what's going on there? I see people having fun. Then the principal came out, you should be doing some brown bag lunches and talk to the staff about what you were doing. Are you seeing a pattern here? I hope you do, because this is one of the challenges of implementing innovation that we need to learn more about, like how we essentially sabotage advances in the innovation by creating an environment where you essentially being punished for getting good at your craft, right? So then he says, my main disappointment this year has been all the additional responsibilities. I came here this semester with a fresh attitude after the STC summer workshop. Boy, I'm going to have all this extra time this year now that I have a basic curriculum to work with. I'm going to have all this extra time to design new STC lessons. But I'm extremely disappointed with these additional duties, how it really impacted my teaching. Because on top of the regular committee work, the regular classes, full classes and so on, now he needed to be doing brown bag lunches. Now he needed to be providing advice. And he was not being provided with any release time to get better and better at his craft. He was being pulled from doing that. All right? So quickly here are some recommendations then. It seems like suggestions about what should work. They do seem to work if we give them a try to gather some data about it. But we need to do more large-scale studies to see what kind of large-scale impact some of these innovations may have. We need to continue investigating, challenges to innovation and best professional development practices for teachers. And then really interesting in moving away from narratives of despair, where we just tend to blame the teachers, or we blame the parents, or we blame the students or the College of Education. Those narratives, they just pass blame and it's just depressing. Or the children narratives where, everything just worked beautifully. Well, I don't know, being a high school teacher, working elementary, and you don't have those days very often. You have some challenges. So I'm more interested in capturing narratives of engagement, when we can document the challenges and successes about what's going on in the classroom in an honest, and meaningful way. So it will resonate true with different people. So STC seems to be providing a useful theoretical framework, and, at least for me and other individuals, about how to enhance teacher professional development and student learning, especially with an emphasis on cross-cultural education and social justice. Definitely having an impact with student learning, as we see the correlation with the active participation or implementation of STC and the connection with high learning. But the next step for us to make better claims about this is to develop an STC observation protocol so we'll be able to scale up the study. And then finally, the recommendation that I'd like to make, and I have a few more, but running out of time, is that, that we need to find a way how to provide an environment of support in the schools. So when you have a teacher who is promising, who is doing all these wonderful things, and instead of taking that teacher out of that environment or putting them with more work, they are provided with more opportunities to keep on getting better at his or her craft. So they will be able to pass on that information, to other teachers, when they are ready, instead of essentially sabotaging some of that growth. Here are some articles that you may find interesting if you're interested in learning more about it. Okay? Thank you.